Merriam-Webster defines a Renaissance man as a person who has wide interests and is an expert in several areas. Another term for this is a polymath, someone who's good at several things. Both of these terms often bring to mind one man, Leonardo da Vinci.
Da Vinci is most famous for his art, such as the Mona Lisa and the Last Supper, but he was also a genius engineer, designer, thinker, philosopher, and futurist. This would be impressive today, even though we have the collective knowledge of humanity in our hands, quite literally.
But in the 14 and 1500s, this would have been nothing short of mind-blowing. Without access to the internet, Da Vinci taught himself how to understand the natural world, be it anatomy or physics, and designed several things that we use today. Helicopters,
armored vehicles,
diving suits, and parachutes.
Just to name a few. Today, you're in for a wild ride.
Because we're about to dive into the life of a bastard child born to a middle-class notary in 1452.
And how he changed the world for better or for worse.
And of course, explain why he's destroying America.
Just outside of Florence, Italy, rests Vinci.
On April 15, 1452, the sleepy little village had no way of knowing that it was about to receive its future claim to fame. Leonardo da Vinci was born to humble beginnings, the bastard child of Ser Piero da Vinci, a middle-class notary in Florence, and an unnamed peasant woman.
Ser Piero quickly had his mistress married off, and took on stewardship of the child. He was by no means nobility, but he had enough status to provide for his son. This was fortunate, as young Leonardo was precocious and had a wide variety of interests,
all of which he had access to because of his father's status. Around the age of 16, Ser Piero sent his son to apprentice to renowned goldsmith Verrocchio,
himself something of a polymath.
By all accounts, Verrocchio was kind to his apprentice, allowing him similar access to his interests as his father had before. He even collaborated with Da Vinci. Most scholars agree that Verrocchio's Baptism of Christ, circa 1472, was a collaboration in which Da Vinci painted angels witnessing Christ's baptism.
2 years later, Da Vinci began taking commissions of his own, under the tutelage of Verrocchio, such as Annunciation.
When Da Vinci left his master in 1481, he began gathering his own clientele,
and started the famous unfinished painting, The Adoration of the Magi.
He eventually found himself in Milan,
painting commission portraits for the nobility and producing altarpieces for churches.
It was during this time that Da Vinci began fairly intensive journaling, documenting his thoughts as well as various experiments and inventions in the fields of engineering, architecture, and natural science.
Leonardo da Vinci used these journals and diaries, most of which have been lost to time, to explore artistic expression and detail anatomical sketches that remain relevant to this day. After his time in Milan, he returned to Florence, where he met and was subsequently commissioned by the notorious Cesare Borgia as a military architect and engineer.
Cesare Borgia, himself illegitimate, called on Da Vinci to create war machines. The bastard child of Pope Alexander VI was also the notoriously bloodthirsty commander of the papal armies.
Da Vinci's work with Borgia was one of the most productive periods of his life, but without a doubt one of the most bloodthirsty ones as well. At this time, swords and knives formed the greater part of most armies, along with the occasional cannon and blunderbuss. But Da Vinci managed to change the face of war forever by inventing automatic weapons, like the rapid-fire cannon, and bringing about the idea of such a cannon that would be held aloft by a single soldier,
today known as a submachine gun.
Da Vinci later returned to Milan.
There is no record of his feelings regarding his work with Cesare Borgia. The impression most historians have is that he enjoyed the work, or at least the traveling and inventing that it involved. But still, he did leave Borgia's employ, most likely because Borgia had accomplished what he had set out to do, the forced conversion of great swaths of Europe.
After Milan, Da Vinci left for Rome, which is when his diaries became a focal point of his life.
Only 7,000 or so pages of an estimated 28,000 exist today,
and offer an astonishing amount of insight despite their incomplete nature.
The British Library in London has fully digitized the Leonardo manuscript, and it is available for anyone with an internet connection to view.
No doubt Da Vinci would have been astonished at the freely available nature of this knowledge.
While in Rome, Da Vinci received an invitation from King Francis I, King of France, to become the member of his court.
Da Vinci had become a famous man in his own right by this time, and such an invitation was not out of the ordinary.
However, the difference was that Francis was interested in Da Vinci's brilliance rather than his mastery of the arts. Da Vinci accepted and remained in France until his death on May 2, 1519, at the age of 67.
While attending King Francis, Da Vinci held the title of first painter, architect, and mechanic,
and was given a house in Clou.
He died in this home, today a museum. While Leonardo da Vinci is perhaps best known for the Mona Lisa, The Last Supper, and other priceless works of art today, his fingerprints can be found throughout history, even in today's modern era of technology, and they have very little to do with classical art.
His position as the preeminent Renaissance man put him in a position to pursue any topic that interested him, chief among which was engineering and automation. Today, the autistic community has claimed the term perseveration.
Classically, this means getting mentally fixated on something, such as a sequence of numbers, a word, or even getting a song stuck in your head to the point of distraction. However, autists use the term to describe their hyperfixations. No one can say with any surety if Da Vinci had any disorders, but he did perseverate. His predominant perseveration was automation.
The concept of tasks being completed using automation, which is using technology and physics to perform actions with little to no human assistance, was a fascinating concept to Da Vinci.
And the idea of robotic men and machines that made life easy for the individual has persevered through today.
He also envisioned a time when men could fly alongside birds and conceived of the first helicopter prototype.
His imagination was not limited to the air.
He drew plans for complete diving suits that would allow humanity to explore the depths of the ocean.
100 years later, British inventor Cornelius Drebbel would build the first functional submarine out of wood.
And 300 years later, diving suits featuring glass viewing plates with which to explore became a reality.
Were it not for Da Vinci's imagination, the Vostok 1 mission, during which cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first human to ever enter space, may not have ever happened.
In fact, our race to the moon and the formation of NASA would have been severely hindered had Da Vinci never conceived of the concept of a pressurized diving suit. Da Vinci's legacy is not only limited to the artistic and the mechanical.
In modern sociological movements, he has been co-opted as a symbol of the queer rights movement. There is no definitive evidence of Da Vinci being homosexual.
And in fact, the only things he had to say about sexuality have led to him becoming something of a hero figure in the asexual community. The act of procreation and anything that has any relation to it is so disgusting that human beings would soon die out if there were no pretty faces and sensuous dispositions. Intellectual passion drives out sensuality. Whoso curbs not lustful desires puts himself on a level with the beasts.
There were accusations of sodomy levied against Da Vinci while he was apprenticed to Verrocchio, but the charges were dropped both times they were brought to court, as there was a lack of proof and a lack of accuser.
Whomever had accused Da Vinci and others of sodomizing a male prostitute, they had not had the fortitude to sign the accusations, which rendered them null and void in the Florentine court. Da Vinci also gives hope to the illegitimate and impoverished today.
Other than his apprenticeship, he had no formal education. The universities of the day were almost exclusively for nobility.
And while young Leonardo's father was firmly within the middle class, he had not the means nor the connections to send his son to any of the elite echelons of learning, such as Oxford, Cambridge, or even the University of Florence.
Da Vinci had the benefit, of course, of having servants to help with the day-to-day matters of cleanliness, clothing, and money acquisition.
But that does not diminish his achievements, nor the hope he still brings to millions to this day.
Da Vinci left behind notes for the future. He no doubt was fully aware that the technology of his day had not caught up to his mind.
He left that 7,000 pages of notes for future engineers to study.
26 centuries ago, the Assyrian king Esarhaddon wrote, "I had monuments made of bronze and inscriptions of baked clay. I left them in the foundations for future times."
Long after his death, engineers, scientists, and artists would cite him as the inspiration for their careers.
His thirst for knowledge and the record he left behind of his discoveries were the foundations they built their own ideas upon. Leonardo da Vinci changed the world, for better or worse, and led society towards its current state.
He is responsible for scuba gear, helicopters, wheelbarrows, parachutes, and even something as basic as improved water wheels.
In his lifetime, they were used for grain mills. Today, They are used for hydroelectric power plants.
Many may argue that he changed the world for the worse, for many reasons.
His time with Cesare Borgia is one example. Another is his push for automation, which is a hot-button issue in politics today in regards to job creation.
Regardless of whether he improved society or hurt it, he certainly changed it. The European Renaissance was in full swing by the time he began his apprenticeship, but he prolonged it, using his 60-some years of life to its fullest, and bringing about one of the most prosperous times for Europe in history.
His Vitruvian Man is still used in medical books today, as are many of his anatomical portraits and notes. He questioned the world around him, refusing to accept that things were the way they were without asking why.
Leonardo da Vinci in no way created critical thinking, but his existence encouraged its practice. Today, da Vinci is a figure who many see as larger than life. Many view him as the progenitor of most modern engineering, while others simply see him as a stepping stone for future engineers. These opinions are simply a small part of his legacy, which will likely carry on for centuries more.
The ancient Egyptians are thought to have held a belief that as long as a person's name was spoken, they were never truly dead. In fact, King Hatshepsut, the only female pharaoh to ever exist, was nearly erased from history by her successor out of spite, specifically because of this belief.
The esteemed painter had no genetic progeny to remember him, but instead he left behind his ideas for future generations to build upon.
If the Egyptians were correct, then Leonardo da Vinci is, effectively,